KP Video News, and this is part 2 of PTSD COPS, and this is my op-ed on the reason why cops do what they do, and the reason why things happen more often and more relevant to minorities rather than anybody else in this country. And these disparities are true and they're real. They are real, and now we have people that are trying to figure out why things are going on the way they are. And like I said earlier in the first part 1, I'm gonna recap part 1, was that one thing that they're not noticing and they're not paying attention to is that you're bringing cops back from Iraq and Afghanistan that have PTSD, and you're putting them in uniforms and you're turning them loose on the minority communities. So basically you have cops with a war mentality that are still focused and still programmed for war that you are turning loose on the community. All right, here's going on with the uncounted victims. These are the uncounted victims of the war on drugs. And it's time time for a grown-up conversation about the racialization and anti-drug policies. Ethnic and racial minorities are incarcerated, police shot, and killed at growing rates across the globe. The United Nations Working Group of Experts of People of African Descent call for drug laws to be amended in light of racial injustice. The reasons for this injustice are not rooted in any problems with these communities, but rather because of the problems with the criminal justice system that disproportionately punish them. Indeed, the war on drugs was designed specifically for this purpose. Now I'll say that again. The war on drugs was specifically designed for to disproportionately punish the minority communities. The first step in trying to address this challenge is for the countries to collect data on drug crimes, tracking data on race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, etc. of those arrested and prosecuted for such offenses as particularly needed. Data collection can be serious pitfalls, if laid back and just a shortfall of collection, and distort the understanding of what's actually happening in countries in ways that carry problematic consequences. Consider the case of Portugal, a country lauded for leading the world in progressive drug policy reform. As a 2016 study shows, there's a sharp difference between the number of men and women incarcerated on drug offenses in Portugal. Women made up 76% of the total number of people in prison on drug offenses, while men accounted for 40%. To those figures in context, if you put those figures in context, the disparity between women and men in 2005 was 60% to 25%. In 2000, it was 47 to 19%. Now it's 76% to 40%. Why had the number of women incarcerated on drug charges climbed so high? A study looked into this and showed that the increase was partially driven by the number of foreign nationals incarcerated on drug-related charges, which rose from 11% in 2000 to 32% in 2009. While many of these women are detained for carrying drugs into the country, a number of them are foreign nationals residing in Portugal with no legal status. No legal status. Many were welcomed to the country from former Portuguese colonies in a movement of population reminiscent to the Windrush generation in the United Kingdom. Women from Cape Verde, for example, tend to speak Cape Verdean Creole and may not able to communicate with the Portuguese-speaking majority in their new country, resulting in social exclusion. Struggling to support themselves through legal employment, some turn to trafficking in an attempt to generate a quick supply of cash. Portugal is hardly the only country that fails to collect data on race and ethnicity. Data collection is lax in France and Canada too. While this is problematic everywhere it occurs, it is particularly damaging in former colonial powers that contend with the significant influx of immigrants. For centuries, colonial forces used racial and ethnic differences to place people in a hierarchical order subjugated to white supremacy. Many of these same countries now naively believe that their socioeconomic problems would go away if they just pretend these divisions don't exist. Sounds like America. Keeping track of them through rigorous data collection is an important step toward addressing current socioeconomical problems rooted in the colonial past and moving collectively forward as a people. According to a 2017 study, 9% of whites admitted to having consumed illicit substances as opposed to 5% of blacks. Yet, black people in the United Kingdom are 9 times more likely than whites to be stopped and frisked for drugs, and 14 times more likely to be arrested and end up in the criminal justice system. So, recently, those disparities have been revealed, have lately grown much worse, and not just for drug searches. Section 60, which is the law they passed in the UK, searches are all searches that are carried out without the need to establish reasonable suspicion. Remember, they had that search and seizure law in New York, and they just recently got rid of that law. This is a similar law where they can just, if they just see you walking down the street, they could just stop you and go all through your pockets and with no real probable cause. So, this is really crazy. So then you have the thing that says, the way officers interpreted the policy suggests that they believe young black males were more likely to commit acts of violence than other groups. This policy was reinforced by a new law. In addition to relaxing stop and search best practices, has also indicated a zero tolerance for cannabis possession, a double burden on black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities already unfairly stigmatized for violence and drugs. There are many possible explanations for why these disparities occur. What's critical is how we know about them, because someone is counting. Western societies stand by principles of illuminated values, openness, and the rule of law. Moving beyond these principles towards truly just societies require soul searching and data collection to facilitate honest and self-appraisal. Realizing where we have gone wrong collectively is the first step toward addressing those wrongs. We can't do this if we don't understand the extent of the problem due to a lack of data, and then fail to grapple with the fixed, glaring injustices. Every person counts, and every person should be counted, as they are not being counted now. And so that goes on. That's part 3. And here I'm going to part 4. And part 4 is the reason why these militarized cops and have, and then you have the racial disparities in the sentencing, and then you have the reasons why, which is the so-called war on drugs. And now here's the outcome, and the outcome is the prison industrial complex. And the term prison industrial complex derived from the military industrial complex of the 1950s, describes the attribution of the rapid expansion of the U.S. inmate population to the political influence of private prison companies and businesses that supply goods and services to government prison agencies for profit. The most common agents of PIC, and remember that, prison industrial complex, and when I say PIC, that's what I'm talking about, are corporations that contract cheap prison labor, construction companies, surveillance technology vendors, companies that operate prison food services and medical facilities, correctional officers unions, private probation companies, lawyers, and lobby groups that represent them. Lobby groups, and those lobby groups are the ones that get the money from these companies that are trying to do their thing, and they get money and they go to DC and they give these Republicans and Democrats or whoever in DC this money so they can continue what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're railroading millions of people into the prison system for the sake of free and cheap labor, which in return they make a profit off of it. The portrayal of prison building expansion as a means of creating employment opportunities and the utilization of inmate labor are particularly harmful elements of the prison industrial complex, as they boast clear economic benefits at the expense of the incarcerated populace. The term also refers to the network of participants who prioritize personal financial gain over rehabilitating criminals. Proponents of this view, including civil rights organizations such as the Rutherford Institute and the American Civil Liberties Union, believe that the desire for monetary gain through prison privatization has led to the growth of the prison industry and contributed to the increase of incarcerated individuals. These advocacy groups assert that incentivizing the construction of more prisons for monetary gain will encourage incarceration, which would affect people of color at a disproportionately high rates. And that's exactly what we have going on right now. If they can put you in jail and force you to work for 50 cents a day, and then the products that you make are being sold on the street, where those people on the street, those minorities that live, just take a city like Detroit, for instance. Detroit has a 35, it's probably like maybe 45, 50% unemployment rate now during the coronavirus, but actually on an average about a 35% unemployment rate. But if you go to jail, you go to prison, boom, you can get a job just like that. Prison industrial. So they move the jobs from the streets into the prisons, and they are making a profit off of you going to jail. So it's just like you've been put right back into slavery all over again. And so the Prison Industrial Enhancement Certification Program is a federal program that was initiated along with the American Legislative Exchange Council and the Prison Industries Act of 1979. This program legalized the transportation of prison-made goods across state lines and allows prison inmates to earn market wages in private sector jobs that can go toward tax deductions, victim compensation, family support, and room and board. The Prison Industries Act were created with the goal of motivating state and local governments to create employment opportunities that mimic private sector work, generate services that allow offenders to contribute to society, offset the cost of their incarceration, reduce inmate idleness, cultivate job skills, and improve the success rates of transition back into community after release. Before these programs, prison labor for the private sector had been outlawed for decades to avoid competition. The introduction of prison labor into the private sector, the implementation of Prison Industries Act in state prisons all contributed a substantial role in cultivating the prison industrial complex. Between the years of 1980 and 1994, prison industry profits jumped substantially from $392 million to $1.3 billion in the 1980s. 1983, Corrections Corporation of America, CCA, was founded by Nashville businessmen and would grow to become one of the oldest and largest for-profit private prison companies in America, laying the groundwork for a transformation in layout of correction facilities across the country. The 58 was established with the goal of creating public-private partnerships in corrections by substituting government shortcomings with more efficient solutions. The first facility managed by CCA opened in 1984 in Houston, Texas. As of 2012, the multi-billion-dollar corporation known as Core Civic manages over 65 correctional facilities and boasts a revenue exceeding over $1.7 billion. To run the most efficient prisons possible, CCA cut costs by reducing personnel and designing its prisons to include more video cameras for surveillance and clustered cell blocks for easier monitoring. For private prisons, labor is the biggest expense at 70% of overall costs. As a result, CCA and other private prisons have become motivated to cut labor costs by understaffing its prisons. In 1998, the second largest for-prison corporation, Wackenhut Corrections, was established. as a subsidiary of Wackenhut Corporation. The WCC would later develop into GEO Group, and as of 2017, their U.S. Corrections and Detention Division manages 70 correctional and detention facilities. Their mission, and so it's like, okay, so that's 70. So by 1992, listen to this name, William Barr, then United States Attorney General, authored a report, The Case for More Incarceration, which argued for an increase in the United States incarceration rate. The passing of mandatory minimum sentencing, this is William Barr, the same bastard you got in there right now that's working with Trump, doing all this crooked stuff that he's doing to help Trump get out of trouble. This is the legislature I'm gonna start over. The passing of mandatory minimum sentencing and truth in sentencing legislature contributed greatly to the exponential growth of the prison population throughout the 90s. Mandatory minimum sentencing had a disproportionately high effect on a number of African American and other minority inmates in detention facilities throughout the 1990s. The CCA and the GEO Group, both heavily connected to the American Legislative Exchange Council, were recognized for their substantial contributions in 1999. So basically, they contributed a lot of money to the politicians in 1999. In 1994, Bill Clinton, listen to that, Bill Clinton passed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, the largest crime bill in history. The Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act directly allotted an increase of funding to $9.7 billion for prisons and introduced the Three Strikes Law, which subjected convicts of 3 offenses to exceedingly long sentences, 25 years to life minimum, amplifying the effects of mass incarceration and increasing the profit margins of the private specialized corporations such as CCA and GEO Group and their subsidiaries. By May 1995, there were over 1.5 million people incarcerated, and increased from 900,000 in 93. In the 2000s, from 1984 to 2000, the overall state spending on prisons increased at an alarming rate, and from 1970 to 2005, the number of inmates in the United States surged by 700%. Developments in privatization of prisons continued to progress. By 2003, 44% of the state's prisons in New Mexico were held by private prison facilities. Other states such as Arizona, Vermont, Connecticut, Alabama, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Utah, Ohio, Florida also began expanding their private prison contracts. As of 2015, there were 91,300 state inmates and 26,000 state inmates, federal inmates housed in private prison facilities, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics nationwide. This is 7% of the 13% of inmates, respectively. In late 2016, the Obama administration issued an executive policy to reduce the number of private federal prison contracts. On August 18, 2016, then Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates issued a memorandum that stated, I am directing that as each contract with the private prison corporation reaches the end of its term, the Bureau should either decline to renew their contract or substantially reduce its scope in a manner consistent with the law and the overall decline of the Bureau's inmate population. Less than a month into Donald Trump's presidency, Attorney General Jeff Sessions reversed the Obama administration policy. The Trump administration has so far increased immigration enforcement and instituted harsher criminal sentences. Many critics of the private prison argue that prison privatization served as a large agent for cultivating and feeding into the prison industrial complex in the United States. So private prisons have become a lucrative business with CCA generating enough revenue that it has become a publicly traded company on the stock exchange. Financial institutions have taken notice, and now some of the largest investors in private prisons include Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Fidelity Investments, General Electric, and the Vanguard Group. According to a 2010 investigation of the United States Department of Justice, many of the employees and prisoners were exposed to toxic metals from not being sufficiently trained or were given the resources to handle toxic material, injury, and illness. As a result, were not reported to the appropriate authorities. When investigated, they found that Unicor, a prison labor program for inmates with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, had attempted to conceal evidence of working conditions from inspectors by cleaning up the production lines before they arrived. And so, all this goes on. Then you talk about the war on drugs, which has significantly influenced the development of the prison industrial complex. The policy measures taken to categorize drug abuse as a criminal issue rather than a health issue have directly sustained the existence of the prison industrial complex. Since Ronald Reagan institutionalized the war on drugs in 1980, incarceration rates have tripled. However, Richard Nixon back in 1971 was the one that actually declared the war on drugs, but Ronald Reagan took it to a whole nother level. So this is where we at today, folks. This is where we're at right now. So you got the outcome of this whole thing is the amount of money that they make off incarcerating minorities in the United States is $1 billion, multi-billion-dollar business. It has nothing to do with, anything else that they've been telling you. It's all about money. They're making money off of you, and it's just like this is just a whole new type of slavery that's going on. It's slavery all over again, and it's like they're destroying black families, destroying black communities, and all for the sake of making profit for them off of your backs all over again. From the first day that black people set foot on this country, black people have been exploited and used for the sake of financial gain, and it still goes on right today. So don't ever think that one of those lying politicians, when they come up to you talking about patting you on the back, they patting you on the back, oh, don't worry, buddy, I'm going to take care of it. No, they're not. They're not going to take care of a damn thing, because they got money invested in locking your black butt up too. So wake up and do what you have to do, whatever it is you got to do to stay out of jail and keep from going to prison. Work, get a job, work. All the drugs is a trap. They bring the drugs here, pump the drugs into the community. They bring the guns, they make the guns, manufacture the guns, and sell them in the community, hot in the community. Then the cops turn around and arrest you. You go to jail. Now it's a circle. It's a whole big circle. And then when you get out of jail, you can't get a job, so you go back and you do another crime, and you go back to jail again. And it's like a never-ending cycle. But they benefit from it. You don't. They benefit from it financially. You benefit absolutely, positively nothing out of this, with the exception of being a slave all over again. And that's where those militarized cops that are coming back from Iraq, that their real true job is to just bust you and arrest you and take you in, but they're so busy and so programmed to kill that they're exceeding what they really truly, their jobs, what they really truly supposed to do. And hey, that's one reason why a lot of these people are trying to call themselves, pretending like they wanted some kind of police reform. They don't give a crap about police reform, because they would lose too much money. They would lose too much money if these prisons closed up. They would lose too much money if that revolving door was shut down. So just be smart, folks. Be smart. Be smart and think about what you're doing. Think about what you're doing and where you're going. Got to think about it. You're being used and abused. Used and abused, man. Dogged out, used and abused. I'm telling you, man, it's not a good look. It's definitely not a good look.